no more.
Well, I'll give you another
I feel
one.
like that
But
has
that's
fallen
that's
so
very
far
much
from today.
a.
All right, people, Jen,
People.
let's get ready, get organized so we can get out of here at a reasonable hour. All right, first thing on the business is the minutes, which were sent out, yesterday or the day before, for the meeting back in December 11th.
Yes, I'll move them.
Judy moved. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you so much.
Any changes, corrections, additions, etc.?
That telephone's not muted, whoever that is on Zoom, it might unmute.
That may be Wilkes.
No, that's Michael.
Oh.
Oh,
No,
that
that was
might be the phone, yes.
603.
Oh, it isn't Wilkes making that noise, it's,
No, he's unmuted
oh, he
again.
unmuted himself, stop that.
Wilkes is somewhere driving across
He
Nebraska.
can hear us, he's right, just, you can hear the traffic and.
Makes it tough.
All right, those in favor of the minutes is submitted.
I,
Any abstain? Any opposed? All right,
approved.
now I wanted to say something before we start. The quote agenda is to first discuss the school and then the town. And I'm not gonna pass it out. I was very disappointed in the email that I got. At our last meeting, we had requested from the school to come up with a proposal with a 3.3% increase in the budget, and what would be cut and the impact it would have on programs. And the sheet that was sent out to us had a 5.05% increase, i.e., instead of down to 3.3, which means we're basically looking at, from this sheet, to get to the 3.3, which is inflation, we need to cut about $175,000 from the school budget. Now, none of us want to cut that without knowing what we're cutting, what programs would be affected, how they would be affected. Because obviously some things are easier to cut than others. But we also know we can't just keep going, increasing budgets by 1.5 to 2 times the rate of inflation forever. So I'd like to give the school an opportunity to say, all right, where are we gonna come up with $175,000? And what would be the impact on this program? Because that's what we asked for at that December meeting, and I don't see it. The materials were sent to us.
You ready?
Yeah.
Going to.
I appreciate your comments, Nick, you're always right to the point, and so we'll address it. The other thing that I did hand out to you, because in the minutes, they recorded a comment that we're the highest paid, or highest per pupil cost in the state. And the latest data that the state has that compiles all school districts, I printed off and made some copies for you. We're certainly in the top tier, there's no question about that. But we're not the top most expensive school. So at your own leisure, you can go through there. It's kind of interesting to try to use why is this district at this cost and why is that district at that cost. You look at the elementary numbers, because we can really only compare elementary school to other elementary schools. The total district costs get affected by a whole bunch of other things. My understanding is that these numbers, when they're computed by the state, take out costs for transportation and take out costs for capital construction. So there's no capital costs or whatever in there. Janet has just done the MS-25, and we know that our costs went up about $1,000 per student in this coming report that'll come out, but we also know that same kind of increase happened all across the state. So we're assuming we're going to be in the same relative position that we were in. So that's that piece. I just wanted to clarify that. as a point of information. So, we did take to heart what the committee asked us to do. We had a special board meeting, it was open to the public. We did have one member of the public who came on and commented. And that person asked us to please not cut any program. We went through, I suspect we met for an hour and a half, maybe as long as 2 hours, I don't really remember, but there was a lot of discussion about, okay, how do we, the number actually, Dick, from, when we do our computations, about 159,000. So it's a few here or there, about the same number. So, there are two places, after all that conversation, because we talked about programs, and the feeling really of the board was that they did not want to have a negative effect on students, and they did not want to have a negative effect on staff. 2 years ago, we went through a process where the community spoke very strongly, and I think the board's aware that they want the program that we kind of have. So, yes, we could take away from a special, or yes, we could cut back on a service. But the minute we do that and we start to discuss what happens, there's an impact on kids, there's a reduction in service of this kind or another. There's a shifting of duties that reduce the impact of those, of that work, and negative things happen. So, after all of that, we look at the high school reserve fund. And we have had some subsequent conversations with individual people. Our leadership team met yesterday. And we really think that we can do something with high school. We ended up not taking anything out of this budget at the end of that meeting. And there's also an adjustment and an error that we had found in the computation of debt service. So there's a $26,144.50 addition in debt service, the only change in the budget, and that brought it up to that 5.05. We also know that we were planning on using 50,000 of the high school reserve this year. But to do that, we have to generate a deficit in high school expenditures. And high school tuitions last year ended up coming in at a lower rate in Hanover than the year before. And we're not gonna use that 50,000.
Can I ask a question
Yeah.
here? I do not understand what is, forces the legal requirement that you have to have a deficit before you can hit that fund. Because all of our other capital reserve funds that I've had anything to do with, when you designate the selectman or the school board as the agent, they can vote money out of the fund for the purpose of the fund. The purpose of the fund is high school tuition. So therefore, why can't the school board vote to take money out of the fund for high school tuition?
I am gonna let my financial expert,
Uh-oh.
Janet, you're on the hot seat.
So the DRA for the high school trust has a very specific set of rules on how you can use this money. And even though the school board is has the authorization to spend the money, they can just basically do the vote at the end of the year, just once our deficit has been established. But when we're creating the budget, we have to create a deficit in the actual budget. And whatever you're gonna use, you need to put in as a reduction in that line. We cannot put it on the revenue side. And it has to do with those dollars already being taxed. So that is a piece of why we can't use it on the revenue side to offset the expenditure for high school tuition. Am I making sense? I'm not making sense.
No.
Okay, so your expenditures and your revenues have to match
Right?
at the end.
Why can't you put in, just throwing out numbers?
Mhm.
I run a budget and I say I've got $500,000 in it for high school tuition. And I've got 200 students at 50,000 apiece, for lack of a. So therefore, I know when I'm going in, my budget is short, a couple $100,000 on what's gonna be needed for high school tuition. Why can't we go in with a budget that says our high school tuition line, instead of being, I don't know what it is in here without really looking at it, say a couple $100,000,
Yeah,
$100,000 less in this budget.
and we can do that.
We can-
That is something that we
That's
can
the
do.
deficit we can show.
Yeah.
And therefore, we create the deficit, which we
Yes.
have to go to the fund to do it. So therefore, what I'm saying is, when we go and look at this budget sheet that you gave us.
Yeah.
And I forget where the high school is on this.
It's right in the very first page, right at the top,
1100.
High school tuition in here is 2.1 million.
right.
Why can't we come in with 2 million and take 185,000 out of the trust fund?
We can.
We can.
And that's one of the,
I think what Frank was referring to is this current budget that was voted last year was the $50,000 that Frank was referring to, that we
Yeah,
will
but
not
we're,
be
the
using.
budget committee isn't dealing with what we voted last year, we're
Right,
dealing
but
with what you've got.
There's more to the story, I guess I said,
Because
he's got a punchline at the
I'm
end.
kind of headed exactly where you are, because finding out and knowing that we're not gonna use the money this year that we thought we were gonna have to withdraw, that's gonna leave that trust fund at $464,000.
Okay,
And so the suggestion that if we are going to have to reduce that was to go there first and take the money from the trust fund and reduce this budget, and that would bring us down to the 3.3.
Yeah.
So we
that's-
could
that
do
was
that.
what we were.
That was not what was voted on at the meeting. If this group feels that that is an appropriate direction, the leadership, which is these two wonderful people, and myself and John and Jeff, we will go to that full board at our next meeting, which is
Tuesday.
Tuesday. And that's the suggestion we will bring to them.
All right, just let me just finish something
Yeah.
here. Remember, at the school district meeting, we vote on the budget committee's budget, not the school board's budget. That's what's put before the budget, before the voters.
Well,
No,
No, yes,
yes.
well,
We
you can
are, I mean-
recommend or not recommend.
Right.
So you vote, and then when I put it in the system, whichever one the school board tells me to bring forward, it will say,
we are a municipal budget community.
okay,
The number in the warrant that the town and the school district vote on is the number from the budget committee
That goes in the warrant.
that goes in the warrant. Not the number from the school board, not the number from the board of selectmen. If we were not a budget community, that, you're right.
Then it would be whatever
Then
you
it would be
wanted.
the school board's budget that goes in the warrant, and the budget committees would be just an advisory. But it's the other way around, because we are a budget community town. So if we say here that the high school tuition line should read 2 million instead of 2.185 million, that's what shows before the voters on that Thursday night.
okay,
And they have the right to raise it up to no more than 10%
Right.
of what the budget committee recommended.
The total budget.
But it
But wait a
is,
minute, I don't think that you can go individual line
No,
by line.
No, but
No, it's bottom line.
No, but
Okay.
we would
All right.
do the bottom line total number.
Right.
And then if people ask where we got that 185,000, we'd say out of the high school tuition.
and you can, I mean, you can move money anywhere you want.
And it's
Right,
variable
it's
where the
bottom
money
line,
comes
yeah,
from,
it's the
Yeah, it's bottom line.
Yeah,
That's what
It is
bottom
bottom
line.
line.
Yeah.
but the bottom line number, which is all you vote for at the school district meeting, you don't vote for individual line items.
But you
But
discuss
we
them.
take it as a responsibility to identify where we think it would come from. When we make a recommendation that's different than the selectmen's or the school board's.
Sorry, just to clarify, I think the school board still needs to vote on it, because the warrant's going to say that its budget committee recommends or votes this way, the school board votes this, correct?
Well, when I was
But that-
first on the budget committee, at that particular time, and I'm going back 25 years, so it's not a good thing to say. But the rule was, once you submitted this sheet, any changes were budget committee. There was no further changes allowed from the school board or the selectmen. Now,
That's at the
under
public.
this is 25 years
Right,
ago.
but there's still our vote, I think that's all that
Your
I was
vote
saying.
gets reflected.
Right, that's all I was saying, that, I
What
think that's all
gets
Frank was saying.
presented to the public
Right,
is what the budget committee approved.
I totally agree. I think what Frank is saying, that we have to go back on Tuesday to vote
Yes,
on the reduction.
Well,
So that is
it would be
reflected.
nice
We are
if
not
everybody was
disagreeing
in
with you at all.
accord, but
no,
if it's
I
not in
have,
accord,
yeah.
then you.
As Judy is saying, I would like the budget committee and the school board and the selectmen and the fire department and
Right.
whatever to agree, so we don't get an argument from the floor.
I would remind folks that the community approved a capital project last year, a bond,
Mhm.
that is the majority of this budget. And when we take out another 159,000 to get to the 3.3, that leaves about a 0.4, 0.5 increase to the operating budget of the school. That's pretty minimal,
Well,
that's pretty minimal,
I'm just saying,
yeah.
Right, and
my
somebody,
concern was you didn't come up with anything. And just what we've said so far, we're not cutting any programs at all to get to 3.3.
I think you'll find that there's agreement with reducing that, taking money from the high school trusts. I think that's where everybody has kind of ended up, so if that,
If that
that
makes it
works.
worse.
Scott,
Yeah.
you haven't said anything yet.
I wanna say something that's probably more or less what Dick has already said, but I find it a little disappointing that we ask, or that our request from the last budget committee meeting was, you know, so yes, it's great that we were at 1% increase plus the building project, but we asked, is there any, taking another look at the budget, is there anything you can do that would, you know, upon further review, would allow you to reduce it to get us closer to the, inflation? And instead, you came back and said, so you probably must have done a great job the first time around establishing the budget, except we found an error and it's gonna be more than what we asked for.
I would argue that, we came back under inflation when you take away the bond that was passed.
No,
And-
okay, I'll remind you that the
Okay.
budget committee was not in favor of the bond that was passed last year.
The town was.
Water,
That's a sunk cost, you can't deal with a sunk cost.
could,
Well,
could I ask, so what was the thought behind, so you obviously talked about using the high school trust fund and decided in this presentation of the budget not to use it. What was the thought process behind that?
At the meeting that we had, we were under the assumption that we were actually going to have to use that 50,000, and that trust fund would be coming down to about 411.
For this year's
In
budget?
our target conversations around the trust, we've always talked about someplace around 450,000. We think that the use of that trust has changed over time, and the need for the size of that has also changed. Because we can absorb 10 kids at 28,000, 30,000, and have, and be at 300,000 in that trust and be just fine. The likelihood of 10 kids coming in 1 year is not very high.
Especially-
So
yeah.
we're thinking that we probably as a board, or the board, I will recommend to the board that they have a conversation about reducing that trust down to about 300,000 as a goal. And that would be a reasonable place for that to be. That allows us then to do that, but the full board hasn't been able to have that conversation. So you have the numbers you have, but that's, I think that's what we can probably do, is to take 150,000 out of that and be in a good
Brings-
place.
Even with the cost of the bond for each year,
Yes.
for this year specifically, coming forward, brings it down to within 3.5%, 4%, somewhere in there.
Yes.
Well, under 4, you
Under
said.
4.
3.3.
So-
We can-
3.3.
I would
3.3.
remind, this doesn't happen very often, but like Dick, I might have been on this budget committee for a few years. And I can remember budget committees, to my naive chagrin, saying, okay, we're at the public hearing, we're hearing from everybody, we're gonna cut this line, which means this amount of money. And that's the budget that went to town meeting, and sometimes it got voted up, sometimes it got supported. But, so this group does have the authority, should you wish, and I'm not suggesting this, I'm just saying this is an option, to say, when we go to public hearing, we don't support this budget, we wanna see it down by 150,000, and we vote for that. So it's just, it would be great if the school could have that conversation, so it would be great if the budget committee and the school board presented a unified front.
Right. And we would, if that is the will or the feeling of this group in a majority kind of sense,
Yes,
we would very much like to have that conversation at the board, our board level, so that we can come back to you whenever you'll have us back, to discuss this again.
It won't be that long.
And bring you that number, so.
thank you.
Now, one other thing, you mentioned, this is one item that you discussed, which,
Well, we discussed a lot of items.
well, all right, you say you discussed a lot. The beauty of this item is it's something we can do, which I call smoke and mirrors. But it doesn't cut any programs.
Right.
So,
And we asked if you cut X out, how would you do it and what programs might be affected? So then the question comes up, if this is a zero program cut, were there things that at least had some interest in cutting that were programs? Now, you started out by saying you didn't wanna cut anything that would impact the students or staff negatively. And is this the only thing that you could do that wouldn't impact students or staff negatively?
We also looked at food service. I mean, one of the additions that we added was food service. And you can probably save 100,000, 110,000. By going back to the old food service that we had, I think that would be, that would really upset people. Our participation, because we're using locally sourced foods as much as we can, and that we're providing really healthy choices for kids. And our numbers are way up, and I just think that would be a shame. It certainly could be done, and we would meet the requirements of the law by having food for kids available. But the experience we've had since I've been here anyway, with trying to use contracted food services, because we're small, it's pretty bad. So that was the second choice. We looked at specials. If you start, the minute you start to work on, make a cut in any of the specials, you start to impact, you lose, two things happen. One, you've invested a lot of money in those things. Especially something like Design Lab, which is a really unique program to Lyme that is well received and loved by kids and families. Preparing kids for STEM careers and early experiences. Yeah, that could save some money, but what does it take away from the experience of the kids, and then what happens to that investment is just lost, all that equipment and stuff that's there. We know from brain research and brain science that exposure to experiences and activities when children are young allows the brain to be open to later learning in those areas. And the example I talk about most when we talk about those things is a personal experience that at age 25, I wanted to learn to play guitar. I found that while I could do the fingering and all of that without any difficulty, I'm pretty much tone deaf. And why is that? It's because I went to a Catholic parochial school, and our music program was singing hymns at church on Sunday. And my Dominican nuns, when they went up and down, they said, "Frank, why don't you just move your lips?" So that's hardly an adequate music instruction, but it limited me for the rest of my life
Yes.
and my ability to ever play a real instrument. So we give those experiences to kids by providing these programs, and when you start to cut them back, you begin to impact on them. Our education committee this past year focused on looking at programs and making recommendations. And they came back to us and said, at this point, we do not recommend reducing any of our academic programs. So that is ongoing. And is it horrible? No. But is there an impact? Yes. And so that's why we ended up where we did.
So Frank, wasn't there
wait a minute.
also, oh, I'm so sorry, I just had,
I have a
Yeah,
question
sure.
about the format of your presentation. Excuse me. I noticed that food service is at the end of some other subtotal. Is there a reason why they're not included up above in the operating section?
There is, because it's an enterprise fund and it's separate, but I'm gonna let Janet speak to that also, because she
Okay.
knows it much
I mean,
better.
that is the answer, basically, is that food service is an enterprise fund and is supposed to maintain itself. It's supposed to support itself. But it never has the ability to do that, because the food costs and the personnel costs are more expensive than the actual revenue from the food sales. So, but that is why, it's separate, completely separate, and then the support from the tax dollars comes in the form of transfer into food service.
Okay.
So you'll see that
I
line
do see
there,
that.
and that's the tax dollars that are going in to offset the deficit.
So that's essentially your revenue line?
Yes,
Yeah, of the offset to the revenue line?
right, of tax usage,
Okay.
tax dollar usage.
The rec fund operates the same way.
Yeah, so is there a place where we can actually, maybe as a separate document, see what it actually costs to run the place, including the food service, not including the debt service, since that's a capital expense? Because otherwise, we're mixing apples and oranges, and it really does, we're not getting a true, for example, there's no depreciation in your budget. No offset to capital, there's no reduction in the capital side of the balance sheet, it doesn't appear, and I understand why, but still it gives you a misleading impression of what it costs to run the school by not amortizing capital. We're certainly showing the cost of the capital here, but we're not showing the reduction in the value of capital over time. So even with the other things I just mentioned, we're still never gonna get a complete picture of what it costs to run the school on you could call it a microeconomic assessment or some other way. I understand DRA gets in the middle of this,
Yeah.
and that's lovely, but it really doesn't help us as a community to figure out what we're spending the money for over a longer time period.
Yeah, I mean, you get to see what you spend when we have to do a capital project to fix something.
No
But
question.
you don't have, I understand exactly what you're asking for and saying. I'm not sure how we do that, because I'm not sure we have an evaluation of the value of our buildings to start with,
Well, you have a capital cost there on the balance sheet, certainly.
you know?
So the capital costs show up on our audited statements.
Right,
They
so
don't show up on our balance sheet internal.
We're not privy to that. unless
No, you do have it here
You
in
have
the
it
town
in the town
office,
report.
yeah.
Yeah, but, I mean, not today, not.
Yeah.
I'm looking for ways, I'm not even gonna call it transparency, because I don't think that's really the issue. I think it's just that the form of presentation that's to some extent DRA determined is insufficient for analyzing economic cost of education. Well, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that's interesting thinking. Yeah,
All right, your turn, since I
Sorry.
cut you off.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't know that Bill was trying to ask a question. I think the other thing I wanted to mention, because we had talked about this yesterday, is one of the reasons that we like to offer the specials and the other parts of the program is staying on par, keeping our students on par with the students at the schools to which they are going to go to high school.
Yeah.
And that they would be at a deficit if we did not have some of these things, which has been important to the town in the past. Is that a
Yeah,
fair?
that is true. It's, you know, if we're looking at the Ray School, you know, Hanover provides all of those specials all the way through. I mean, one of the things you end up looking at is world languages, and the
Music,
majority
art,
of that
language.
comes in middle school and up, but our competing schools provide full programs starting in kindergarten, first grade, like we do, but that's a position. And again, it goes back to that brain research I was talking about in neurological development. It's if you're gonna have good pronunciation and good accents and all of that stuff, the scaffolding in the brain needs to develop at those early ages for that to happen. Otherwise, it's insufficient, so.
Rich, I thought you
Yes, I
wanted to
did.
say something.
Sure. First off, thanks for coming by. I thought more about my question last time about the cost per student, and I realize it's far more complicated. You gave a hint that our cost per student would go down if we put 2-3 more students in each class.
Yeah.
Duh, I mean,
Yeah.
that's, and so thank you for that, I mean, that's part of it, and, I think the other question that I'd like to ask though is that, 2 years ago, the school board, well, at this meeting, we got a report from the school board budget committee talking about costs for the school and all, and one of the things it said in part was the future trajectory of growth in the school budget will not be sustainable. And so I hear us talking here, year to year, it's like, we need this, we do really wanna improve the school lunch program. It's a great thing. And, yeah, I'm not an educator, I'm not in a position to say yes, no, anything like that. What measures is the school board, school district making with an eye to sustainability, to working, to saying, yeah, we're spending this much here, it's working pretty well, it's working quite well, actually, maybe we don't have to increase that, and so, and I don't wanna get into the management of the school, but what measures is the board taking to achieve at least a nod towards sustainability, because these large increases, as Dick says.
So whenever you look at the cost drivers in school, the cost drivers are people. I mean, that's 75–85% of the
Personnel.
budget, that's gonna be people driven. We've just completed a round of negotiations with our teachers union, and the philosophy is that we need to stay competitive with our neighbors. So we have a very nice, attractive contract for our teachers. I think they appreciate it. I think we get good service for it. But, through the negotiation process, that's one way to try to control that. And you have to balance off what are the community needs and what are you trying to achieve? And how can you strategize through negotiations, how you might, work on that. Part of the cost for people is health insurance. I think probably one of the most uncontrollable costs that we deal with and the hardest to deal with. Some of these things just become public policy. I wake up in the middle of nights after all these years in education, and I still try to figure out is there a way to do something about that? And lately, I have been thinking about what would happen if the educational health plans became a part of our public insurance. And would that provide an equal level of care at a more reasonable cost? I don't know the answer to it, but it's something that I am thinking about, would like to look into going forward. So there are things like that. Beyond that, Jen has spent a lot of time in her voluntary roles looking at school funding. And public policy statewide on school funding is a real problem. And it's in the courts, we have between the legislature and the courts, and the needs of small communities, it's really, I think that the answer lies someplace in public policy. It's unfortunate that I think bad public policy around school funding forces local communities to have these very hard conversations that probably shouldn't have to happen. That's kind of where I'm at with it. But your board's, I will tell you, your board is very aware, from my perspective. There is concern about aspects of the community that really struggle, and how the whole tax issue really can change the makeup of your community. And that's not just here, it's everywhere, and it's a struggle. So, the work that you guys are doing it's hard and difficult, and it's not easy to sit here, I don't think, and criticize, work that other people have done, even though we're all trying to balance it out, so.
Well, there are two things I'd like to say at this point, get them off my mind. Number one, the issue with school funding to me, it doesn't matter whether the money is raised by the state, by the feds, by the town. We're still spending the money in the school. And the only way to reduce the total amount that comes out of my pocket and your pocket to support them is to reduce the amount of money we spend in the schools, not shift how we raise that money to another organization. Because whether it's Fed money, state money, or local money, it's all coming from you and me. So that argument of having the state pay for the schools instead of the towns, to me, doesn't cut any mustard, because either way, we're paying. The other thing is, I always hear there's no way to save money with the school. One of the things, because it's people related, the number of people we have not many cases, but some cases, and it's not as big with us as some places, is when you decide to split a class. You go to Japan and they have classes of 50 kids. And if we proposed that in this country, the parents would be up in arms.
Yes, they would.
And they send their kid to private schools so they can get classes of 12 kids, and they spend $70,000 a year to do it, if they have it. And in the public schools, we use somewhere in the low 20s range usually to split. But sometimes we're riding right on the cusp of whether we split it or not. Every time we split it, it's an extra $100,000. So that's one area we can look at. Now, we don't have enough of the figures to really figure out when's the right time to split a class. But when we split a class with 22 students in it and did 2 classes with 11, it seems pretty darn expensive for public education.
We are not, well, 22 is the limit up through grade 3, or grade 2.
Well, I mean, I'm not gonna,
But then we go up to 25 by our policy.
yeah.
Yeah, so,
So, I mean, I think that's something we have to look at, because that is an area where, when we're just on the cusp of splitting versus not splitting, it's $100,000 expenditure when we decide to split. And sometimes a policy like that can be a guideline, but not a requirement. And I think that's important consideration of the things like that that we generate locally. It's not like a statute or a constitutional amendment on an adequate education, whatever the hell that is.
sounds like you might be.
So I
running
think
school
that's
board.
something to consider.
Did you hear what he said? He said you might be running for school board.
So anyway, where I think we stand now, and I think most of the budget committee have bounced around, is that we have to look at reducing the high school tuition line, that we all can sort of agree is the place where we can save some money in the current proposed budget.
I don't agree with that.
And, well, if we're gonna reduce the school budget, would most of us agree that the lowest impact way to reduce it is to reduce that line?
Let's make it a motion, then we can have the discussion of what the alternatives are. Would that be all right, Dave?
Well, I thought we already asked them for that, and
I don't, I'm talking about a motion here at our group. Once we have a motion, then we can and
make it.
then we can hear other views on it. Would that be all right? All right, so I move that we recommend a budget with an increase, was it 3.3 we're talking, or 3.4? Okay, 3.4, all right. And that money come out of the high school tuition line and be offset by a reduction in a withdrawal from the high school trust fund. That is our recommendation back to the school board.
So 3.4, 3.5?
Whatever the inflation rate is we're
3.3 is, I
using.
think, what we
3.3.
asked for.
Okay, 3.3 is fine.
Okay.
That's my motion.
Thank you, Bill.
Do I hear a second?
I'd second it if only to hear what the alternatives are.
Well, that was the purpose of making it.
Yes.
Exactly, thank you.
Okay. So instead of specifying where it comes, just specify the amount.
However you wanna do it, I'll accept an amendment.
Do you wanna?
But the point is that
Discussion.
the motion is to drive the discussion about what the
Specifically
alternatives are,
about
which
alternatives.
Hayes is asked to speak.
Yep. Okay, we don't vote till after everyone discusses.
I think you have to have a vote before you can discuss the motion.
No, you have a second, then you discuss it.
I'm sorry, you have to have
We've
a
got a
second.
second from Rich.
Yeah. So now we can discuss it.
Right,
All right,
Okay.
now, you are proposing, or part of the discussions, which is your motion.
Right, and I'm proposing it for two purposes. One is, it seems from Frank's discussion that might be acceptable to the school board. It's something they'd already discussed and they're gonna go back. That's fine. But I also heard comments from my neighbor that she is not, she would like to have another opinion.
well, especially about high school.
Right, another, yeah, so another way to do this. So that's why I made the motion, and I'll defer.
All right, neighbor, what's your alternative?
I'm not necessarily gonna speak to an alternative at this point, but I'll say that, you know, coming to a reasonable number for that high school trust fund has been a conversation that's been going on for years, right? And I think that's a separate conversation than what we're talking about now. But reducing an overall budget by taking money out of a trust fund or reducing it intentionally in a line item is a temporizer to me. It's not looking at the big picture. So it is not therefore sustainable year to year. I think, yeah, it'll fix the problem this next year, but it's not going to fix the problem next year. So I think we're kicking the can.
All right, so your position really is, if we use high school tuition, it's a short-term fix, not a long-term fix.
Right.
What's a long-term fix?
Well, I think that there have been plenty of things on the table today. I think I would like to hear what the board discussed about the academic director in your meeting. Do you want to talk to that? Do you want me to? I'll say that that's a service that, I mean, I have plenty of anecdotal stories over the years that I don't think are necessarily appropriate here, but I can bring them forward if people are interested. I've been at the school as a parent before the academic director in a different model, and after the academic director, and I'm speaking as the service, not the person. And I think that there aren't any metrics to show that that is something that's necessary in our school district. And I think that in addition to talking about the conversation, I think it'd be good to know what the overall cost to that position is.
So that, to address that position, was looked at by our education committee in terms of what it does. There was a presentation to the board about that as well. What the trend at the moment is, in all of the schools, is to try to bring on and hire people in those positions. It was an area that has not traditionally been at the level it currently is in elementary schools. Plainfield, Cornish, for example, and Grantham are now sharing a single person, and they're looking at expanding that going forward, because the level of service is not enough. What's in Lyme, under the previous structure of the school, that person was not able to actually do a lot of the things that needed to be done. And since we brought on a full-time principal, we have invested in new curriculum in language arts, new curriculum in mathematics, and we're working on new curriculum for science, so we have to do social studies. Those curriculums need training for teachers. They need to be aligned to grade levels vertically. They need to be supported. That person's job is to do that. Probably one of the more important functions of that job is to analyze data and to sit down with teachers and administrative staff and make decisions about programming and help based on testing results and how our kids are doing in those various fields. You've made a tremendous investment in that position. It's coming to fruition in terms of what we want to get from it. And so, could it be eliminated? That would probably save you the money that you're looking for if we didn't have that position at all. You could reduce it and try to continue with what you're doing. But that is the essence of the conversations the board had. The minute you take some of that responsibility away from that person, then that falls on to the building principal to try to pick up. That makes it harder for him to do the work that he does at the level he needs to do that. So, yes, but it's like it's squishy. You move it around, you lose something. The conversation we had at the board level when we talked about all of those things, meant a lot of other positions. It always came back to the same thing. Does the balance between what we lose, is it really worth that little bit of money you save by taking a 0.2 out of that position? And, the conclusion was no. We'd rather take it from someplace that doesn't have those impacts on our structure.
What do you mean by taking a 0.2 out of that position?
Pardon me?
You said taking a 0.2
Yeah,
out
a
of
day
that
out of it.
position?
Make it a 4-day instead of a 5-day, or a 3-day instead of a 5-day.
So you discussed not eliminating the position, but reducing it.
Yeah.
Reducing it or sharing it with another school.
Yeah, so I think in the end, you're gonna say to us whatever you say tonight, this motion, which really comes down to, you gotta take this X number of dollars out. The board then has to decide how they're gonna do that. I mean, well, they can follow your thinking and thoughts or not, but the bottom line is it's make the numbers meet. So they'll have to have that conversation.
And this committee has to have that conversation, because in the long run, whether we, our bottom line is the number,
Yeah,
and we can find a place to pull it out arbitrarily, which doesn't suit anybody, and it doesn't matter, because if you get X number of dollars, you can put them where you want to put them. But we need to also be thinking about how important is it to meet that dollar goal.
We're gonna run the room for people that haven't said anything yet.
Okay, I'll amend my motion to remove the requirement to take it out of the high school tuition.
And just make a requirement for them to find X number of dollars?
Yeah, I mean, I don't wanna be in charge of the school any more than anybody else in this room, except over that in the room. But I was just a suggestion to force a discussion,
So you wanna see it, your amended motion is to reduce it to 3.3 or 3.5?
Right.
Okay,
Second that.
and hey,
And
Rich,
leave it up to the school
are you
board to
willing
come
to-
up with
I'm
where it would
completely
come from.
content with that, yes.
okay,
Thank you.
so Rich, Hayes second, Rich said okay too, cause he had seconded the first motion. Thank you, sorry, I'm.
3.3% increase.
Period, from hither, thither, and yon.
All right. My numbers were correct, that would be 159,296 from the current proposal.
That's right, what we had.
That's what we had.
159,206?
I rounded it to
296, 159,296.
Okay,
that's my number.
How'd we get the same one without talking?
I don't know.
okay.
Great minds.
All right,
Do you want
that's
us
the
to,
motion on the floor.
I still have a couple of points to make.
All right, we're discussing this motion that's been made in second.
I mean, for one thing, I think it's pretty clear that the school board's education committee is not gonna recommend, right, like changing any of the programming, they're not going to recommend changing the academic director's position. They're just not gonna recommend that. So the likelihood is that we're gonna maybe be looking at a reduction in the high school tuition line as the recommendation, which I'll say I agree with Hayes, it's not a solution. And even if you wanted to offset the tax rate, I wouldn't do it all in 1 year. Like, I would take some of that, maybe 50,000, 50,000, 50,000 over the course of time. It doesn't make any sense to draw that down to an arbitrary $300,000 without even having a real conversation about what the value should be. It doesn't make any sense.
Well,
So
there's
that.
several other.
The other point I wanted to make though is that we've had a lot of conversation here about the sustainability of the budget and the tax rate. And my sense is, having sat at school district meetings for years, many people, possibly the large proportion of people in town, do not have an issue with the tax rate. And they don't see it for themselves and their household as other than sustainable. And I think that's a conversation that this committee needs to have or recommend, right? I think that one thing that hasn't been made entirely clear, maybe to me, so I might be making some assumptions here, is that for many years, corners have been cut on the municipal budget to make space for the money that has been put and increased in the school budget. And those cuts that have been made are now coming to bear in a way. And I think maybe that's the conversation that we need to have, that needs to be stated, and that people need to understand that the municipal budget is no longer going to be going up at 1-2%. The municipal budget needs to be increased. We need to put money into the fire department. We have a select board whose stipends are woefully less than what they should be. Who's going to be on the select board in the next 5 to 10 years? You're gonna have the same problem that Aaron is pointing out with the fire department. Nobody's going to do nobody's gonna do this anymore. I think that the tenor of maybe the demographics, maybe it's also a sign of the times, maybe it's people now wanting to become politically involved. It's very difficult to stand up in front of a small town and make your opinion known. You know, I think that there are a lot of conversations that we need to have and to talk to people about that. you know, but I don't think, I think that even if this committee takes or insists that $150,000 to $200,000 comes out of this budget, that money is gonna go right back in from the floor. And you won't have accomplished, like, we as a committee won't have accomplished anything, because we won't have even had the conversation that I think the town should be having more holistically. I think that's,
Somebody else here wanted to
That's what I
say
got.
something initially on this motion.
Well, Jen is fundamentally right about that, right? And that's, like, but the thing, and I can look you in the eye, Frank, because you and I both know that if you needed to find $500,000 in the school budget, you'd find it without any impact on programming, no matter what you think your committee said. We both know that, right? And
$500,000?
without,
No, I don't know.
my turn to talk, you can refute later. Right,
But
but fundamentally, right, like and that is a discussion, I don't know if we can have that here, Jen, because what you're saying is essentially, yeah, right, like, if we keep on increasing taxes in this town 10% per year, right, to me, that sounds like financial mismanagement. Whether or not we can all pay it, sure, but it has an impact on changing the demographics of the town. Are we responsible for keeping the demographics of the town the same? Yes, no, I don't know. There's plenty of people that talk to me that said, look, lived here many generations, I'd like to stay in this town, and this is impossible. So, right, what happens on the floor, that is one set of votes. The voices I hear say something different, right? And so that is a really hard discussion here to have. On top of that, the people that perhaps can afford a 10% rise per year for the time being may not intend to stay in Lyme for a very long time,
That's 100% true.
right? Whereas
Yeah.
the people that intend to stay in Lyme for a long time may very well not understand this discussion. I think there is plenty of people in this town that have no idea that what we vote for in the school budget and the town budget is a direct impact on what that tax bill looks at the end of the year. You think that's a foregone conclusion. I don't believe that to be true. So in that case, I will say what I said to you when we had these school board discussions about it, right? We have a fiduciary duty as elected officials to be responsible with the budget, no matter what. We can't pass that back off to the voter, right? That's what we do. We vote our conscience based on what we believe our constituency, how we represent our constituency.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree, and, you know, to walk back in terms of the programming, the other thing I didn't say is that I think it's very easy to measure a negative impact on staff. I think it is a lot more difficult to measure a negative impact on the students. And we could have lots of debates over whether Design Lab is actually setting kids up for, like, STEM educations. We could have conversations about how the kids in school are learning math, which, as a parent, I think is kind of abhorrent what I see coming out. And I've had friends whose kids have moved to different districts within this state and in other states, and their kids are way behind in grades 4, 5, and 6 in terms of what the math, the expectations of the school from the students when it comes to just some of the basic stuff. Again, it's all theory, right? On how kids and people learn best, and I don't know, right? So I do what I do with my one child at home. I think that it's up for debate, though, on what a negative impact to the students is. I think that perception doesn't always match reality. So, I think you have to really have a conversation about this, but I wouldn't say, knowing at least people who are parents in school, there's a way people are gonna vote to reduce any of the programming in the school, even if I think it would be fiduciarily responsible and, in my personal opinion, would not have a negative impact on my one student, right? And so, who knows?
Well, I'm curious, Jennifer, how you would frame that discussion so that it is more broadly heard within the community before we get to town meeting or school meeting, because I think, it doesn't get outside this room necessarily very well. and I don't know what the vehicle is, I don't, this is.
I mean, you could have another public forum, people need to come to
We
that
can
public
move
forum. I do think that one issue, I'll put out there, and people can agree or disagree with me, it is a challenge for some people to stand up, particularly at any public meeting, but school district meeting in particular, and speak their mind openly about the budget, because they believe that they're going to be labeled as anti-education. And that's not their case. In fact, some people that I've talked to were public school teachers for the entirety of their career in the Upper Valley. They just want to stay in their house, long-term. And I have some sensitivity to that, and to Vince's point, the likelihood is that when my daughter's done with school, I'm not gonna stay here if the tax rate continues to go up. When I stop working, why would I do that? Is that really going to be affordable in the long term? I don't know, but I also don't see things changing at the state level. There are conversations that we could have, these would be much longer term, but to start doing things regionally, the state's not gonna do it, but that's a whole, but to have some type of public forum where if we could sit down and realistically plot out the municipal budget over the next 10 years and really say, these are where we think the salaries municipally should be, these are where the benefits should be, these are where the stipends should be, this is how the fire department ideally would be, maybe not utopic, but ideally, realistically would be staffed. That's what this budget looks like, and this is how we, conceive of that budget increasing over time. And the school, minimally at this point, I don't think they can add a lot of programming. So there's no time left in the day, right? So I don't, so in my estimation, it's gonna be the municipal budget that now starts going up at a rate that's potentially higher than inflation.
Well,
And the
we've got-
school, outside of the construction, right, they've really not presented a budget with a significant increase outside of that construction project this year.
But then there are the uncontrollables, right, with the health insurance and everything
I
that's
mean-
going to continue to go up, probably faster than CPF.
Yeah,
Well, there are always
That's
gonna be
true.
some things that increase faster.
So I wanna go back to a comment that was made, I think, a while back, saying that the school has never really cut back on things. I remember back when my kids were in school, what we cut back on was maintenance. And we had a lot of deferred maintenance, which is why we now have bond projects, and expensive bond projects. So one of the things I applaud Frank and John and Craig, our facilities director, the facilities committee, for doing, is they're putting together, how do we start to take care of our facility so we're not adding a huge bond every 10 years. We've got 2 bonds that are gonna be paid off in 2034. We've got a roof bond that will be paid off in 27?
26.
26.
7 of 26.
So 2 budget
We're
cycles.
catching up on the physical facility at this time.
Exactly.
And that's built into the budget and as debt service, for lack of a better terminology for
Right.
it.
So I think that the important thing though is, we're making decisions that we think are responsible for the town, for the students, and for the school. People costs are our most expensive cost. If we don't have a fully functioning school, the values of our houses go down, and those people who wanna move out aren't gonna get their value back. We moved into this town by luck that we just loved the house, we loved the town. Had our kids here, we're not gonna move until they can't take care of us anymore in our
When you get to be
3-story
my
house.
age and Bill's age.
Exactly, exactly, when Kendall will take us, that's when we're moving. But, that was not our intent, but we fell in love with the town for the services it provides. And understanding that in order to age in place, there's a full spectrum of things that are needed in the town, including a functional school, including a functional fire department and EMS, including roadside mowing, including all sorts of things, so
Plowing.
how do we do that? Right now, we have an opportunity to take a look at the budget, we've done that. We know that services are not something, specials are not something that parents are gonna say they wanna see go. So the school board looked at what we could look at. There was an excellent presentation done by John to the board and to the education committee separately. I'm sorry, not to education, it was actually to the personnel committee about the academic director position, and I think John really substantiated why it's necessary and why cutting it would be penny wise but pound foolish. And so the real opportunities are the high school trust fund for this year. It is a short term, but it is something that would bring it down for this year. And food service, that was what we came to. And it would be a shame because the food service is exponentially improved. But we don't have to have a great chef, we just have to have food.
All right, I
Well, you
think it's,
don't even have to have food, you can get a waiver. My kids brought bag lunches for all those years.
at any rate, the motion on the floor, and I'd like to get back at some point to the motion on the floor, is basically a cut of $159,296 from the current proposed budget, which would reduce it to a 3.3% increase. And we've discussed a number of different ways that the school board may choose to get there, but I would not look forward to having them come in again next week with the same budget with a 30% increase, $30,000 increase again. I'd like to see the decrease. Now, we never had a motion. We said we'd like to see last time. This time, we've got a motion on the floor.
Could we just, I'd like to leave it at 3.3%.
All right, well, that's what the number is.
Because that's, we talked about inflation, not about dollars, so.
Right,
I-
but that's the dollars that equals that.
I understand that, but the rationale is about inflation, not about the dollars.
All right,
Okay.
all right. Are we ready to vote yea or nay on that motion?
Can you read the full motion out so we all know exactly, because it got amended a couple
Pretty
times.
short. Bill moved to recommend that the select board reduce to
It's not select board, school
the
board.
school board, sorry. I'm old. Reduce to 3.3% in the next budget submission, and
Increase.
increase, yes,
3% increase.
and he seconded that.
All right, I will go right along and give I would just like a yea or nay at this point. Because we're using a call to motion issue, because we still have some discussion of the selectmen's budget, I believe, tonight.
No, we don't, we're not prepared.
That wasn't on the agenda at all, Dick.
And
It
we
wasn't,
have,
what's this about?
it wasn't on the agenda, and we meet tomorrow to try and finalize
All right.
what we're doing. So I don't wanna present something that's not gonna be right.
All right, I would then like to go around with a yea, nay, is everybody ready for that?
3%.
All right, Mr. Beck?
I'll have to look at my.
Bark.
Barb?
I approve, yay,
Yes.
yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Yes. Rich?
Yes.
Haynes?
Yes.
I don't vote. Scott?
Yes.
Bill?
Yes.
Christian?
Yes.
I vote
Wilkes, well, I was gonna say
That's
Wilkes.
Wilkes. Thank you,
I heard, I was
Wilkes.
gonna
From
say, I was
Nebraska.
not gonna let you forget him,
Wilkes is yes?
yes.
Kristen is yes. Brian?
Yes.
And did I call Judy's name or
That's
not?
unanimous.
No.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes or no?
I'm a yes.
All right, I basically have a unanimous from the budget committee
Thank you.
without identifying where the potential cuts would come from.
Just say-
And I would like us all to agree on the proposal at the school district meeting. That would be my goal.
Can I just ask a procedural question? When we have the next meeting, so we'll make that change, what is your typical, do you wait to take your vote until the public hearing?
Our final vote, we vote what number to take to the public hearing.
So that's on the 22nd.
And then after the public hearing is when we make the vote for what goes to the school district, the
For the-
MS 27 or whatever it is.
So that's what we need to talk about, Janet, because the first meeting was the 15th.
Yeah.
To vote to take it to to public hearing. We're clearly not gonna make that one.
Oh, okay.
Next
So
week?
that's,
That's
that I
next week.
think is what
We could,
we did not understand.
Why wouldn't we
we
make
could
it?
do
You're
that,
not, you think you're gonna make it for both the town and the school?
yeah,
I don't, are we gonna really think you're gonna be able to make it, Judy?
I do.
All right, the goal
Dina's going, what are you
is
talking
next
about?
week to vote on the numbers that go to the public hearing. And then we
Okay.
have 2 weeks before the public hearing.
Well, you still have, I was gonna say, if it doesn't happen on the 15th,
Then you have
you
another meeting.
still
We got
can
one
do it on
chance.
the 22nd.
All right,
Right,
Well, when do you want it?
we would like it next week.
we would like it next week so that we don't have to meet the week after.
I wasn't worried about the school, I'm just worried about.
No, I'm school's hard.
Yeah, I just would
They haven't-
try to,
I'll be browbeating.
someday I'm gonna figure it
Oh
out.
my gosh.
You're gonna live with me.
My goodness, we're in an hour and 12 minutes at
Because it
this point.
says,
Yes,
We'll vote.
long time.
but this vote is not voting on each warrant article, right? This vote on the.
No,
This
that's,
is the-
that's on
Is the-
February 5th.
That's on.
This is
Yes.
the operating budget coming up next.
Right, and just to, the number that we're gonna take to the public hearing.
Right.
Now, we do, if you have warrant articles for like an appropriation to the capital reserve, special warrant article, I
Right,
don't think the school has them, but we would like to see those too. Because we have to have at the public hearing, any money article.
right. So I have to have the
For the
draft,
selectmen is X number of dollars
Janet,
to the
we'll figure
various
it out.
funds,
right, okay, so I want the draft warrant for the 15th,
basically.
okay.
If you have it, that would be good because it's the whole
Draft,
picture.
right.
Yours is fairly easy because you don't have things like the funds
All the
going into
capital
the
reserve
capital
funds.
reserve funds.
Right, okay,
And then the standalone articles. But if they have dollars in them, we have to vote on them at the public hearing.
okay. Thank you very much.
Any questions?
But the public hearing is February 5th, you said, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Last day for petition warrant articles is the 4th. Public hearing, the official public hearing is the 5th.
5. Thank you,
Right.
ma'am.
We will have any petitions and warrant articles this year?
I don't know, maybe.
If people are really upset at what we're doing, we'll probably get one or two. All right, do I hear a motion to adjourn? Mr. Brown?
I wanted to, raise a point, there was a discussion, there was mention of how can we have this discussion that Vince talked about, you know, the school
The
versus the
impacts.
town budget versus all these things. And I was encouraged at one of the select board meetings recently where, I think Judy, you said, the school district meeting and the town meeting could be, even certainly at that date, could be moved onto the same date, even for this upcoming March. And
Yep.
that might be a way
We-
to start that conversation. That's,
That is a
I'm
way
done.
to start it. We have been looking at that, a somewhat small group of us have gotten together. We may be somewhat stymied to do it this year, but we are going to go forward to look for next year to possibly make some changes to enhance the total picture of the people that are involved in both meetings, because we are concerned that there's a selectivity of who comes to the 9 AM Tuesday meeting and who comes to the Thursday before 6 PM meeting. And it would really, the impact, I don't think, and I've heard from others, as you had said and Rich was saying, the impact doesn't strike people. It's easy to vote for this because it's a good thing and you should do it. It's easy to vote for this one because it's a good thing, you should do it, and then you get your tax bill and you're kind of knocked back because it's a lot. And we've tried different things in the past, I know, and there are state regulations, especially on the town side, but we're trying to look at how to enhance how we do it with those business meetings. The voting is pretty easy, it's pretty standard, but to try and make it so it's not burdensome for anyone, but everybody gets the full picture. And we're gonna continue those conversations, and we're gonna try and, the school, folks seem to be amenable. the select board is amenable, we're just trying to pull it together, and it's gonna take a little bit of, more conversations and possibly having to go to the Secretary of State to get permission to do something different. So that's where we are.
Things that worked traditionally in the past, I don't think would work again, because it used to be town meeting on the Tuesday morning
Yep.
and school district Tuesday afternoon.
Right.
And the problem with that is, that worked very well when people all were local, and town meeting day was a state holiday and everything was closed. Doesn't work anymore because people have to go to work.
I just wanna know, it's not necessarily an opportunity to have this broader discussion, but there is a discussion this Saturday on the strategic plan for the school. So those of you who care about the direction the school is going, it's a great opportunity to have
10
a
o'clock.
conversation. 10 a.m. at the school, snow date is the following Saturday. So,
And Bill,
I had two things. One goes back to a discussion or a comment from some months ago, Frank, about changing the fiscal year for the school to facilitate, I think I'm saying this right, to facilitate the budgeting process so it aligned itself with the town budgeting process by way of the calendar, so that the years were overlaid and not offset.
or changing the town to a.
Well, either way, whichever,
Yeah,
and I don't know if
think
this,
we can change ours, I think we're
Yeah.
locked in.
Yeah, it's the town that would have to change.
The town would be the one to change, Bill.
all right. So, and the second one was, at a recent regional planning commission meeting, one of the things that was, there's 27 towns in the Upper Valley Lake Sunapee Regional Planning Commission. And one of the members, I think it was from Ackworth, this was after a long discussion about what should the regional plan have, was unanimous consent that we should worry about the regional character, the rural character of the region, let me put it that way. And a fellow from Ackworth said, yeah, but what about the rural characters? And I think this is directly to your point, is the real characters are getting priced out of maybe Lyme, maybe out of New Hampshire, I don't know about that, but it's a sad, I mean, it's an unfortunate situation when you see some of your valued citizens leaving town because they can't afford to live here anymore. And I think that's part of our fiduciary responsibility.
Yeah. Some of us have seen a number of our friends move out because we've reached the age where they're no longer working people. And it's pretty hard to make it in this town on social security.
And if you can have that conversation and people would come, because the metric shouldn't be people moving out, because we don't know what's going on behind doors. Like, people are living in poverty probably, and we don't know it until they have to move out. I mean, there's just no way to gauge that unless
Well,
people come together.
there was some of that and more of that when I first moved to town. I remember shoveling a walk after every snowstorm for somebody to get to their outhouse.
There's still plenty of people in Lyme struggling,
Yeah.
even though there's plenty of people that
I'm
are.
not sure that there's too much of
And I
that
think
going
for
on
sure,
now.
even in our peer group, you've got people spending 15-20% of their income on property tax, and they're doing it to get into a good school
Correct.
district,
Yeah.
right? And, you know, so there's that, and then you also don't know how many people I know, in at least in my peer group, not only are we taking care of our kids, we're taking care of our parents, right? And so there's a lot of stress, right? And I think that's just kind of a general thing. I mean, it would be interesting to talk about, like, the thing that I've thought about, in particular, as Aaron has brought things up, and I haven't talked to him about it specifically, so I want to, is, you know, if the state's not gonna come to the table, right, with any realistic solution, is there something that could be done more regionally? Like, and that's where things like the Lake Sunapee Planning Commission and sort of, it would take a decade to institute things, but maybe in that way, because I've seen that even with the schools, like, we're all these insulated little siloed units.
There
And
was, yeah.
what Cornish, Plainfield, and Grantham have been able to do is a demonstration of cooperativity.
There is a definite trend among the select board in the 27 regional, it's less so in the towns that have city managers or town managers, because they're able to see what's going on and keep ahead of the curve to some extent. But the smaller towns realize that, like us, they're in deep trouble.
Yeah.
And the opportunity to share fire equipment, an effort to get the legislature to pass enabling legislation which would allow town employees to take on the state employees' health insurance. There's some other things like that that are monetary, that would have a tremendous impact regionally and certainly locally by extension. But, you know, as I say, individually, you can't do it.
Right.
It takes either at the regional and or the legislature level in order to put those things into a meaningful implementation posture. I mean, and the Regional Planning Commission is definitely for that, but again, you need some expertise on the table to pull these threads together to get them to a point where you can go to the you know, the governor or executive council or the legislature and try to get some momentum for these things.
Except the legislature's current political lean is to reduce state taxes,
Oh, well,
not to increase
I
them.
don't
Right,
think
but
that's
you're
ever
not even
changed.
asking them,
Yes,
you're not
it
even
has.
asking them for more revenue though, you know, and I think that there are people who are starting to think like this. I had a conversation with Alex Torpy, who was the town manager in Hanover, and he has now, he's started a nonprofit, and he's trying, this is sort of one of his ideas, and I would pen him as, I don't know him very well, but I would pen him as an expert in public policy in a way.
But the point is,
There may be different
it's not
opinions
going to
on
happen for this tax year, the next tax year, that it's gonna be a long haul
I
to
was an
get these
excited
things
utterance.
overhauled to the point where there is meaningful change financially at the taxpayer level.
Yeah,
But the longer we wait, of course, the more
Yeah.
people will leave town and
Where are they gonna go?
not New
that's
Hampshire.
not New Hampshire,
They're
they're
gonna go to
leaving.
Kentucky in the hills.
But they won't have services there at all.
Nope, but
No, but they
they'll
won't
be
be paying
able to
for
afford
school.
their house.
But they won't, but they'll be shoveling their walk to their
Oh, yeah.
outbuildings.
We've done that before.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
South.
All right, I think we're ready for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right,
You beat me.
Frank?
that's a privileged motion, I believe.
And
All unanimous.
Yeah.
So Judy, your outcry reminded me of when I was a kid at Sunday service.
Got an email?
And the pastor said something about
Committee,
reminding
a lot of
kids
it
to
is
eat their
just like-
broccoli. And I was